on the Washington Journal. Well, the House is about to go into session, and they are continuing their debate and discussion on defense appropriations. They'll be coming in just a minute. Thank you for joining us today on the Washington Journal. We will be back again tomorrow. Dr. Groves, who is the director of the census, will be here to take your calls and questions. And by the way, Book TV on C-SPAN 2, 48 hours of Book TV is Saturday and Sunday, begins at 8 a.m. on Saturday. We will be live from the Harlem Book Festival in New York City on Saturday. You can go to booktv.org and check out the full schedule. Here comes the House.
House will be in order. The House will be in order, and the chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., July 19, 2012. I hereby appoint the Honorable Daniel Webster to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 17, 2012, the Chair now will recognize members from a list submitted by the majority and minority leaders for the morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, and each party is limited to 1 hour, and each member other than the majority and minority leader and the minority whip are limited to 5 minutes each, but in no event shall the debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Fox, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I couldn't believe my ears last Friday when President Obama made the revealing statement, quote, "If you have a business, you didn't build that. Someone else made that happen," end quote. The President's decision to speak as an authority on the private sector where he's never staked his own livelihood is baffling. The takeaway from his speech may be boiled down to this. It's not your smarts, it's not your work ethic. If not for the government, where would you be? Ask the entrepreneur who has taken real risk if that rings true. Ask the small business owner who took out a second mortgage to get his company off the ground. Ask those who wakened before dawn to fire up the ovens at their bakery or tend to the needs on their farm. Was Washington a co-laborer in their work? Should Washington claim any credit for their success? Job creators stake their own money and security on their ventures, and most do so without the safety net of a government grant or bailout. In America, not everyone chooses to take those risks and join the ranks of job creators, and among those who do, not everyone succeeds. But that is the symptom of a choice-driven free market and part of the beauty of our country. That is why our Declaration itemizes as one of our inalienable rights the pursuit of happiness. This is the understanding that the American dream looks different for everyone, and that through hard work, talent, choice, and opportunity, so too will its results. Inherent in the American psyche is the belief that hard work can change the course of a person's life. I know that to be true in my own life, and 63% of Americans share that belief, as opposed to 37% of French, 45% of Dutch, and 46% of Norwegians. That hope in hard work is among our country's greatest assets, and it is a tragedy that the principle was so diminished by our White House. You see, Mr. Speaker, I have a background as a small businesswoman. Together, my husband Tom and I, we built an independent nursery and landscaping business in North Carolina more than 30 years ago, and it's still in our family today. I've seen what it takes to keep a small business afloat. The hours are long, the strain on the family can be significant, and you live with the knowledge that one sustained economic downturn could spell the end of your life's work. No one from the government was there when my husband and I worked in the rain and snow to finish jobs so we could get paid, or cut Christmas trees and load them when the temperature was so brutally cold we could hardly tie knots to keep them on a truck. No one from government was there in the wee hours of the morning when we were doing our regular jobs at the same time working to start our business. Small businesses operate in a world of bottom lines Washington knows very little about. Unlike Washington, they don't have the luxury to deficit spend, print more money, or profess as quote, spending cuts, lower than anticipated growth. When the President claimed the American system allowed the successful to thrive, he made a dangerous error. Government doesn't allow its citizens to thrive, nor does it enable them to thrive or permit them to thrive. That language suggests government is a benefactor possessing the authority to give or take the blessings of open commerce as it sees fit. No, government does not allow you to thrive. Government, when it operates in its constitutional capacity, does not obstruct your thriving. Ask small business owners today, and they'll likely tell you they exist in spite of government's burdens and interference. Government already obligates small businesses to pay more than $10,000 per employee each year to comply with federal regulations. That is money they are not directing toward hiring new employees. But even with that knowledge, Washington's regulatory tsunami continues. So do the taxes. In a faltering economy, job creation is of paramount importance. And when you raise taxes in a faltering economy, job creation is thwarted. The President acknowledged as much in 2009, but his policies run to the contrary. Perhaps the President's lack of familiarity with running a business in a recession is responsible for his insistence on increasing taxes on 940,000 small business tax filers in 2013. Perhaps it's because he doesn't know the ins and outs of private sector creation that he's willing to risk 710,000 American jobs on his tax crusade. We who know the private sector want to spare him that lesson. Taxes will devastate our economy. To grow it, every American should benefit from an extension of tax relief. Mr. Speaker, Washington didn't buy the American dream for the millions of small businesses that comprise the backbone of our economy, nor did Washington show up sick when a shift needed to be covered, miss soccer games because a shipment had to be received, or work graveyard because someone had to do it. Americans did that. Too quickly we forget that everything the government has, it takes from taxpayers. And if taxpayers do poorly, so does the government. So Washington must remain mindful. If the policies it imposes make it harder for small businesses to grow and create jobs and eliminate their ability to invest, it is Washington that will find itself in crisis as it is now. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
There's a battle underway about the very existence of public broadcasting. We thought that we were past this when 15 months ago the House Republican leadership targeted NPR and tried to defund the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Luckily last year, 170 million people who don't just listen to or watch public broadcasting but depend on it unleashed an unprecedented show of support. As a result, the Republican leadership walked back. One good thing about last year's budget was a requirement to have a study about alternatives to funding public broadcasting so that people would have hard facts for this year's budget discussion. Well, that study is in. And it clearly shows that there is no viable alternative to federal funding for public broadcasting. Many of the proposals that have been suggested would actually result in less money overall for public broadcasting in the long term. Yet, the House Appropriations Bill, marked up yesterday, would slash funding now, defund NPR federal support, and end public broadcasting as we know it within 2 years. I had dinner with Ken Burns last night, and we discussed this. He pointed out that his 5 or 6 projects in the pipeline would be never seen if this budget goes forward. So enjoy his program about the Dust Bowl this November, because you will never be able to see the Roosevelts, Jackie Robinson, Vietnam, Hemingway, all will never be finished or seen if the Republican budget proposal is approved. The problem is that Governor Romney, who has singled out public broadcasting as one of 5 projects that he would defund, and the Republicans listen to a tiny fraction of the American public that is even a minority in their own party. Polls show that 2/3 of Republicans surveyed would either keep federal funding for broadcasting as it is or increase it. What resonates with Republican primary voters is not what America wants, needs, or believes. The unprecedented threat comes at exactly the time Americans need public broadcasting the most. NPR News, the object of greatest Republican scorn, is the most trusted brand in American news media. PBS shows like Sesame Street have helped 3 generations of parents raise their children with effective, commercial-free educational programming. Locally owned news is becoming only a memory for most America as large corporations buy up local stations and newspapers. There's no money to be made by commercial stations that cater to the special needs of rural and small-town America. Luckily, public broadcasting is there because their mission is to serve, not make money. We must stop this attack on the critical service, especially for rural and small-town America. It's time for the 170 million Americans who depend on public broadcasting every month to again fight back, and for Congress to finally listen. The radical proposal to slash public broadcasting, defund NPR, and terminate public broadcasting as we know it is a powerful symbol of how far out of step the Republican leadership is from the country they're supposed to represent. There's no reason to make public broadcasting a partisan issue. Public broadcasting has broad support from Republicans, Independents, and Democrats alike. That's why PBS and its member stations were named #1 in public trust and a, quote, excellent use of taxpayer dollars for the 9th consecutive year. It's time for people who believe in public broadcasting to stand up to this extremism and settle the question once and for all about the future of public broadcasting. Unless we fight now, there may be nothing left to protect.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Craig, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For far too long, over 30 years in fact, Minnesotan students have been faced with an 86,000-acre problem. When Minnesota became a state in 1858, Sections 16 and 36 of every township were set aside in the trust of benefit for schools. The state could use, lease, or sell the land to raise money for education. Then in the 1970s, the federal government created the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. These state school trust lands within the Boundary Waters cannot be timbered, harvested, leased, or utilized for their minerals. Thus, they are not generating money for the school trust. In result, approximately 86,000 acres of state trust lands are currently locked within the boundaries of the Boundary Water Canoe Area, unable to produce critical funding for Minnesota public education. Ultimately, Congress got us into this situation, and Congress is going to have to get us out. On June 8th, the Natural Resources Committee Subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands conducted a comprehensive hearing on this legislation. Our goal, preserve and protect the boundary waters and allow state-owned school trust lands to raise revenue for Minnesota's education through utilizing our timber and mineral resources. It is imperative that we solve this long-standing problem. Minnesota law specifies that these lands must earn money for school trust lands. In fact, the state has a constitutional responsibility to earn a financial return from the lands to fund the education system. That is why I introduced H.R. 5544, the Minnesota Education Investment and Employment Act, which will give state-owned school trust lands trapped in the boundary waters to the federal government in exchange for federal government-owned land outside the boundary waters. This legislation is needed for the federal government to execute the bipartisan plan recently agreed to by the Minnesota legislature and signed by the governor. Our economy cannot wait. Our kids in the classroom shouldn't either. This legislation will produce new opportunities to create well-paying jobs and additional revenue for our schools. Minnesota school trust lands are a 154-year investment in the future. times are tight, and our schools and teachers could use some help. Currently, some of the school districts in Minnesota, including mine in North Branch, Minnesota, have classes with up to 40 students and have scaled back to a 4-day school week. Just recently, the largest paper in Minnesota, the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, penned an opinion piece which stated that the enactment of this legislation would be a boon for the 8th District of Minnesota and our economy as well. Unfortunately, special interests are attempting to derail this broad, bipartisan land swap, which includes jobs for Minnesotans and additional revenue to fund our schools. To swap these lands trapped within the boundary waters for lands located outside of the boundary waters is simply to execute a federal action. Our state, its people, and our students should not endure years of litigation and disingenuous delay. Importantly, Minnesota Education Investment Employment Act would not eliminate a single acre of boundary waters land. In fact, it would add federal land to the whole existing boundaries, making the boundary water canoe area whole. The boundary water canoe area is an important and vital aspect of the 8th District of Minnesota, and we will take care of it. As an aside, in a benefit, the bill guarantees Minnesotans will retain their existing hunting and fishing rights in the boundary waters. Now, more than ever, it is our duty as Minnesota leaders to honor the state's obligations owed to Minnesota students and to restore the integrity of the boundary water canoe area wilderness. This is a team effort, and I am ready and willing to work with all stakeholders and my colleagues to put Minnesota schools first. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Gutierrez, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to announce today that more than 100 of my colleagues have joined me in writing to President Obama to thank him for his action to use prosecutorial discretion to stop deportations for DREAM Act eligible immigrants. We are pledging our continued and strong support for this policy. My colleagues and I, 104 of us, are standing together to make clear that we think America is a better place with the immigrants who will be helped by this new policy. Of course, not everyone agrees. Progress doesn't always mean consensus. My colleague, Mr. King of Iowa, wants to sue the president, take him to court, because Mr. King is determined to deport every last young person who is DREAM Act eligible. Mitt Romney says that he would veto the DREAM Act and does not support steps to protect these very young people. Let's remind ourselves exactly who the Republican candidate for president believes should be deported. DREAM Act eligible young people who have lived in America for more than 5 years. Most of them were brought to our nation as children, many of them as infants, toddlers, yes, babies. They've stayed away from crime. They attended our high schools and colleges. They are no different from your children or my children. They regularly excel at school. Some are valedictorians. They are athletes and musicians and leaders. Many of them want to serve our nation in the military. They are leaders in their high school ROTC. They are in every sense of the word except for the very narrow, exclusive sense promoted by Mr. King and Mr. Romney, outstanding young Americans. Apparently, when Mr. King and Mr. Romney look at the winner of your high school science fair or a young immigrant eager to become a soldier, they see a threat to our national security. Sensible Americans see their friends and neighbors, young people who want to make America better. They want these young people to be treated fairly, and they also want our nation to be safe. So, Mr. Speaker, I would ask Mr. King and Mr. Romney a question. In a world where our law enforcement officials have limited time and resources, who should they be focused on investigating, detaining, putting behind bars, rounding up, and deporting? The captain of your high school chess team or a drug smuggler? I know the answer. I think most of Americans would agree. Immigrants who break the law should face serious consequences. Immigrants who are busy studying for exams should simply be left alone. That's not just my opinion or just the opinion of immigrants or advocates or 104 of my colleagues. Despite those few who would like to sue the president and force him to kick high school kids out of this country, President Obama is actually legally and responsibly using prosecutorial discretion to leave young people alone and focus instead on actual criminals. It's the consensus legal opinion among experts. Even the Supreme Court has weighed in. In their Arizona decision last month, the Supreme Court wrote, quote, "A principal feature of the removal system is the broad discretion exercised by immigration officials. Federal officials, as an initial matter, must decide whether it makes sense to pursue removal at all." Whether it makes sense to pursue removal at all. Supreme Court. And if the Supreme Court's opinion is not enough, then I submit the opinion from members of Congress, including members I don't often agree with when it comes to immigration. These include Lamar Smith, the chairman of our Judiciary Committee, David Dreyer, chairman of the Rules Committee, and even Brian Bilbray, chairman of the House Anti-Immigration Caucus. Just a few years ago, as this letter notes, they weighed in forcefully on prosecutorial discretion. In a letter to a previous president's administration, the staunch opponents of immigration reform enthusiastically defended prosecutorial discretion, writing, quote, "The principle of prosecutorial discretion is well established." They wrote, "Legal experts at Immigration Service, quote, apparently well-grounded in case law, should show that Immigration Service has prosecutorial discretion in the initiation, the beginning, and determination of deportations." It's simple, really. And the members of Congress who signed this letter with me today, the Supreme Court, President Obama, and yes, even Lamar Smith and dozens of his colleagues just a few years ago, get it. It's time to leave hardworking immigrants alone. When we do, our law enforcement officials can focus on catching the actual bad guys. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that this letter signed by 104 members of Congress to President Obama thanking him for granting deferred action to DREAM-eligible immigrant youth be submitted for the record.
Without objection.
Without objection. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I come to the floor once again to reiterate federal law, a law that was passed in 1982 called the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, and the amendments offered in 1987 which said that Yucca Mountain would be the long-term geological repository for nuclear waste in this country. And it's unfortunate that I have to keep coming down on the floor to address this issue because of the administration's position to defund, derail, and stop, and actually break federal law. So to do that, not only do I just talk about the legal aspects of the federal law, but I have been going around the country and identifying locations where we currently have high-level nuclear waste and asking the basic question, would you rather have it at location A or location B? And so today we return to Pennsylvania to a power plant called Limerick. Limerick has 1,143 metric tons uranium of spent fuel on site. At Limerick, the waste is stored above the ground in pools and in casts. It is 20 feet above the groundwater, and it is on the Schuylkill River, which is 40 miles from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. That is where we currently store high-level nuclear waste. Now compare that to where we should, by federal law, store high-level nuclear waste. In a place defined in law under the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, Yucca Mountain in Nevada. Currently, and we've only been working on this for, this tells you it's a government job, we've only been working on it for about 30 years, and we've only spent about $15 billion to study, research, and ascertain that Yucca Mountain is a suitable location. So at Yucca Mountain, since we spent approximately 30 years and $15 billion, how much nuclear waste do we have on site? Zero. If we had it, where would it be stored? It would be stored 1,000 feet underground. It would be stored 1,000 feet above the water table, and it would be over 100 miles from the Colorado River. There's no safer place in the country, and there's no more studied location than Yucca Mountain. And it just makes sense. What is a better location? Next to a major river that feeds into a major metropolitan area of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, or underneath a mountain in a desert? I would submit to you that underneath a mountain, under a desert, is the proper location. So what's the holdup? Well, the holdup is the senator from Nevada, Harry Reid. But more compelling are the other senators from his party who are allowing Senator Reid to block this, which is a detriment to their own state. And so we're going to talk about two in particular. We're looking at 4 senators from the 2 states: Senator Casey, Senator Toomey, Senator Manchin, Senator Rockefeller. Senator Toomey's already on record is supporting Yucca Mountain. In fact, I'll quote him here: "The alternative is what we have now, highly radioactive waste located at 131 sites in 39 states, including nuclear power plants close to the Lehigh Valley. That cannot be as safe, as secure as burying this stuff deep in Yucca Mountain." So the other senator is quoted as saying he's got question marks here because being a senator for 5.5 years, we don't know his position of whether he thinks storing high-level nuclear waste at Limerick is a better plan than placing it underneath a mountain in a desert. He understands the concern and the need. He is quoted saying, as a senator from the state with 9 commercial reactors, this being one, and 10 million people living within 50 miles of those reactors, I can tell you that nuclear security is extremely important to Pennsylvanians. And so my question, which is a question posed is here, is will you state a position on whether you think Yucca Mountain is that location since it's in federal law? So why is this overall important? As I've been coming down to the floor for the past 1.5 years, we've done a tally sheet about where do senators stand based upon their votes or their public comments. We have 55 senators say, yes, Yucca Mountain is the place where we ought to go. Of course, if you follow closely in the parliamentary processes between the 2 chambers, you really need 60 to move a bill in the Senate. So we're 5 short. We need Senator Casey to get on record in support of Yucca Mountain, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Butterfield, for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to pay tribute to North Carolina State Representative William L. Wainwright, whose earthly journey has ended. Representative Wainwright died on Tuesday of this week, July 17, 2012, at the age of 64 after a brief illness. Representative Wainwright was a dear personal friend and leader in the 1st Congressional District. Representative Wainwright was Deputy Democratic Leader of the North Carolina House of Representatives and was formerly the Speaker pro tempore of the House. In each position, Representative Wainwright was the first African American to hold the position. In addition to serving the citizens of Craven and Lenoir counties as their representative for the past 21 years, Representative Wainwright was a tenured pastor and presiding elder of the New Bern District of the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. His ministry touched thousands of people in his home community of New Bern, Havelock, and Harlow. For more than 40 years, Representative Wainwright taught God's Word in pulpits all across America. He counseled those in need. He visited the sick and was friend to all. In the General Assembly, Mr. Speaker, Representative Wainwright was a leader among leaders. He was chairman of the Legislative Black Caucus. He served as vice chairman of the Finance Committee. He was also a member of the Commerce and Job Development Subcommittee on Business and Labor, and the Committee on Health and Human Services, Homeland Security, Military and Veterans Affairs, and even the Committee on Insurance. North Carolina Governor Bev Perdue said this of Representative Wainwright: Whether he was in the pulpit or the legislature, William Wainwright's priorities were without question and his devotion without peer. He served the Lord and the people of North Carolina with courage, with humility, and with love. He and I arrived at the General Assembly about the same time. From neighboring districts, he was wiser in the ways of both politics and the human spirit. Ever since and up to his last days, I relied on his invaluable counsel, and I will always treasure his friendship. Heaven is a richer place today. Those were the words of North Carolina Governor Bev Perdue. County Commissioner Johnny Sampson in Craven County, North Carolina, said he worked around the clock for the History Education Center, and he was able to get things done. He wanted to help people who could not help themselves. Those were the words of County Commissioner Johnny Sampson. In closing, Mr. Speaker, it must be said today that North Carolina is better because of the life and work of William Wainwright. William had endless energy and deep passion for the people he served. We will miss this giant of a man. May God bless his memory and provide comfort to his beloved family and his community. I thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Westmoreland, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I come before you today with a great sadness, but with a sense of pride to honor one of Georgia's own heroes, Private First Class Brandon D. Goodine. On June the 7th, Brandon gave the ultimate sacrifice when his unit was attacked with improvised explosive device by enemy forces in Maiwand district of Kandahar province in Afghanistan while he was supporting Operation Enduring Freedom. Brandon was a beloved father. He was a husband, a brother, and a son. He was taken from us much too soon, but not without accomplishing some great things. He believed that his greatest accomplishment was his 3-year-old daughter, Catherine. Brandon became a father at a young age, but devoted his life to making sure Catherine had everything she needed. In fact, his reason for joining the Army was so that he could be sure that she was going to be taken care of. Her birth gave him direction and purpose in life, helping him believe he could accomplish anything. Everything that Brandon did was for Catherine. Giving everything 110% was what Brandon did. He was just an all-around great guy, striving to make something of himself. Brandon attended Henry County High School and later joined the Navy ROTC at Greenville High School. On May the 2nd, 2011, he joined the Army and proudly served as a scout with Bravo Troop, 4th Battalion, 73rd Cavalry Regiment of the 82nd Airborne Division from Fort Bragg, North Carolina. In his unit, he was a brother to his fellow paratroopers. They remember not only laughing and having fun with him, but his kindness and generosity that he showed them. Going out of his way to volunteer or help someone was not unusual for Brandon, but on June the 7th, he was assigned to a mission to prevent the enemy from freely attacking peaceful communities in Afghanistan. He bravely gave his life doing what he did best, helping others and giving them a chance for a better life. His commitment to his daughter, his family, and our country inspired his older brother Christopher to enlist in the Army 3 months later. Brandon's mother, Mandy, said she was not only proud to be his mother, but his friend. He was a hero to his family, a role model for his 3 sisters, a beloved son, a brother, a loving father, and a dedicated husband to his wife, Nicole. One of the biggest tributes to Brandon's life has been the support from the community. When Brandon was being transported home for the last time, flags were placed along the road to honor him and his sacrifice. He was laid to rest on June 18th by his close friends and family in McDonough, Georgia. I'm proud to stand here before you to honor the life of Brandon C. Goodine and to thank him for his service to our country. Brandon has left a lasting impression on those he has touched, and his bravery will never be forgotten. Joan and I wish to extend our deepest sympathy to Mandy, Dwayne, Catherine, Nicole, and all Brandon's family and friends, and we will never forget his great sacrifice for his nation so that we may all live free. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Quigley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if anecdotal evidence was science, I'd be standing here proclaiming that global warming is real. Just step outside. It is severely hot, oppressive, simply unenjoyable. Often I feel as if I'm standing behind an 18-wheeler blowing heat and exhaust in my face. But no, I'm just walking my dogs in Chicago, no less. Chicago, the city of snow. Oh yes, snow, the stuff that emboldened those who said that global warming was a farce. Quote, just think about that snow piled up against your door, they said. But global warming is part of a larger climate crisis, climate change, something the Union of Concerned Scientists says includes such events as more extreme storms, more severe droughts, deadly heat waves, rising sea levels, and more acidic oceans, to name a few. You might have noticed I'm citing the Union of Concerned Scientists, not the group of folks who noticed anecdotally that the weather was extreme. It would do us good to heed the words of science and not the remarks of a few casual observers. I don't make my case that global warming is real because it's hot, just as it doesn't follow that global warming isn't real when it's cold. Extreme weather is climate change. Over 200 peer-reviewed scientific studies have concluded that global warming is real and potentially catastrophic. No scientific peer-reviewed studies have found the opposite. None. As of July 3rd, 56% of the continental United States was experiencing drought conditions. This marks the largest area affected by drought in the 12-year record kept by the U.S. Drought Monitor. Scientists note that temperature records reveal a long-term trend for warming that has been picking up speed. The first decade of this century was the warmest on record, according to NOAA's State of Climate in the 2010 report. It is real because science tells us so. We have sustained 1,644 record heat days from January to June of 2012. We have endured 631 days of record rainfall. We have shoveled our way out of 98 days of record snowfall. The prolonged heat wave this past spring included the hottest March since record-keeping began in 1895. 671 records were broken, according to the National Weather Service. April marked the end of the warmest 12-month stretch ever in the United States. So what does all this snow, rain, heat, drought, ocean acidity, and raging forest fires mean? Scientists say it's global warming. Scientists say that our warming climate is causing more and more extreme weather events, and that it can and will get worse by our inaction. Several weeks of snowmageddon, which prompted taunts of Al Gore by members of Congress, do not disprove scientific fact. At the same time, the brutality of today's untenable heat does not solidify my stance any more than the snow disproves Al Gore. Local temperatures taken as individual data points have nothing to do with the long-term trend of global warming. To get a real read on global warming, scientists rely on changes in weather over a long period of time. Looking at high and low temperature data from recent decades shows that new record highs occur nearly twice as often as new record lows. So no, my belief in global warming isn't sprung from a conversation with my neighbor, nor a straw poll of people I'm sitting with, sweating at a Cubs game. My belief in global warming is born of a respected acknowledgement of sound science that tells us that global warming is real. As Winston Churchill said, I never worry about action, but only about inaction. My concern, my fear, is that we have gone too far to save the planet. We've neglected to protect because we've traded science for reading the wind. Global warming is real, and the extreme weather and sound science demonstrate that this is so. Let us know the crippling fear of inaction no longer. Thank you, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Bilirakis, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent address.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise today not only as a member of this esteemed body, but also as a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and also as a co-chair of the Hellenic Caucus. I stand before you today to recall a somber anniversary that has pained the Cypriot and Hellenic communities for the past 38 years. Mr. Speaker, even though the tragic events of the Turkish invasion of Cyprus took place long ago on July 20th, 1974, the suffering of the victims has not subsided. This anniversary is a time for America to respectfully remember the brutal Turkish military invasion of Cyprus, to mourn those who have lost their lives, and to condemn the continued occupation. Over 5,000 Cypriots were killed in 1974, and more than 1,400 Greek Cypriots, including 4 Americans of Cypriot descent, still remain missing. Since the invasion, Turkey has established a heavily armed military occupation that continues to control over 30% of Cyprus. Forced expulsions of Greek Cypriots on the occupied land have left nearly 200,000 people displaced. These Cypriots were kicked out of their homes, making them refugees in their own country, Mr. Speaker. These properties have been unlawfully distributed and are currently being used by tens of thousands of illegal settlers from Turkey. To this day, Greek Cypriots are prevented by Turkey from returning to their homes and properties. Another tragic result of this 38-year occupation is the division among Greek and Turkish Cypriots who have been forcibly separated along ethnic lines. This unnatural division of the island nation is a crime against society and a crime against the people of Cyprus that can only be resolved by ending Turkey's illegal occupation. Mr. Speaker, 38 years is too long. On the occasion of this anniversary, we need to take a long, hard look at our own commitment toward helping Cyprus reach a lasting and enduring peace, free from occupation, division, and oppression. A few years ago, the U.S. House had the wisdom and foresight to unanimously pass H.R. 405, a measure I introduced, which expressed strong support from this body for the implementation of the July 8th agreement. Last month, Mr. Engel and I introduced House Resolution 676 to expose and halt the Republic of Turkey's illegal colonization of the Republic of Cyprus with non-Cypriot populations, to support Cyprus in its efforts to control all of its territories, to end Turkey's illegal occupation of Cyprus, and to allow Cyprus to exploit its energy resources without illegal interference from Turkey. The Republic of Cyprus has also worked alongside its European neighbors to bring about a stronger integration of Turkish and Greek Cypriots' interests for the good of the island and its people. This has included a partial lifting on restriction of movement across the ceasefire line that continues to forcibly divide Cyprus. Mr. Speaker, I believe that because of this continued integration between Greek and Turkish Cypriots and the economic and political successes that the Republic of Cyprus so readily wants to share with its neighbors, it is possible to bring closure to this 38-year occupation. And now, as Cyprus takes over the EU presidency, the first time since its accession to the Union in 2004. Cyprus has long been a strong and faithful ally of the United States. It continues to work with us in the global war on terrorism and has supported our efforts in both Afghanistan and Iraq. Mr. Speaker, 38 years is too long. It's long enough. It is time to have Cyprus, a Cyprus that is once again unified without Turkish occupation of troops, foreign illegal settlers, where human rights is a fundamental for all Cypriots. Every legal citizen of the Republic of Cyprus, irrespective of national or religious background, is eligible currently to enjoy all rights provided for by the Constitution and international conventions signed by Cyprus. The only obstacle, Mr. Speaker, is the government of Turkey. We Americans, as friends of the Cypriot people, owe it to them to do everything in our power to support peace and an end to Turkey's 38-year illegal occupation of Cyprus. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to yield the balance of my time to Mr. Royce. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman for yielding, Mr. Speaker.
But your time's expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Towns, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I come to the floor today to recognize Reverend Jacob N. Underwood, the founder of the Grace Baptist Church in the East New York section of Brooklyn. He is a very unusual person and has done some great things. For instance, when the people in East New York were complaining about the lack of housing, Reverend Underwood pulled a group together and started building houses. And he established the Grace Towers because the fact that people were complaining about not having housing. And then they came to him to talk about the inadequate schools. And of course, at that point in time, he pulled some folks together and started a school. And of course, when they were talking about jobs and all of that, he also provided jobs. I just recall recently talking to Brother Lee in the East New York section, who indicated that Reverend Underwood gave him a job, and that as a result now he has a house and family, and he went on to say how excited he was about that job that Reverend Underwood provided. Reverend Underwood did so much in the community. He was the kind of person, he didn't believe in just complaining and sitting around and just talking about what needs to be done. He was the kind of person that would go and get it done. And of course, we need more people like him today because Reverend Underwood was a very progressive person and had an agenda and promoted human welfare and social reform in the church and the community. When people would say, "You can't do that," he would just say, "Watch me, because all things are possible with God." He's a very strong man of faith, and he just felt that with a little support that he could accomplish anything that he wanted to accomplish. Pastor Underwood also established a soup kitchen and one of the first daycare centers in the East New York section of Brooklyn. He really believed in helping others. And what I liked about him is that he was not the kind of person, if you ask him for help, that he would call a press conference. You know, some people, if you ask them for help, the first thing they want to do is call a press conference and let the world know that you've asked them for help. He was not that kind of person. He would make a decision to help you, and very quietly, and just do it, and was happy over the fact that he was in a position to do it for you. Pastor Underwood served on the local school board, and he was very big on voter registration. A lot of the people in the area were not registered, but he sort of talked to them and called meetings together and to encourage us to get involved in terms of registering people. And as a result, a lot of folks were registered in that community. He was also on the Civil Rights Committee. He was the first elected chairman of the East New York Community Corporation back in those days, and president of the New York Progressive State Congress. He served twice as moderator of the New York Missionary Baptist Association. What a great man. And of course, he was chairman of the Brownsville East New York Clergy Association and president of the New York Progressive State Convention and corresponding secretary of the President's Department of the Progressive National Baptist Convention. He also was the president of the African American Clergy and Elected Officials Association of Brooklyn. And he currently serves as the chairman of the Churches United for World Action. At the age of 84, he decided to start another church, not in New York, but in the state of his birth, South Carolina. And of course, let me conclude and thank Reverend Underwood for his inspiration and commitment to making the world a better place for all of us to live. He's a great teacher, he's a great innovator, great educator, and of course, he believes that he has an obligation and responsibility to help others, and that is what it's all about. Now, at the age of 86, on his 86th birthday, I tell you, he came and he indicated the fact that he was not through organizing and doing things. And I would say to Reverend Underwood and to those who actually know him, the world is a better place because of the fact that this man has been here for 86 years, making a difference, doing things on behalf of people. And he can truly say that this world is better because of his involvement. On that note, I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Murphy, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, remember back in school when your math teacher expected you to show your work when solving a math problem? Made sense. A number on a page, even if it was the correct answer, didn't suffice because your teacher wanted you to demonstrate you knew how to solve the problem. Now, there the outcome was a grade on a quiz or a test. But what about when we were talking about hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars? Why is it we take on blind faith the cost estimates produced by one of the most influential accounting firms in the United States, the Congressional Budget Office? In 1974, the Congressional Budget Office, or CBO, was formed to give Congress independent, nonpartisan, objective analysis of legislation. In addition, the CBO is required by law to produce a cost estimate or score for every bill coming out of committee of either Chamber of Commerce. That sounds good in theory, but the problem is no one knows how CBO arrives at their numbers, and they won't tell us. They don't have to. CBO is not required to show their work like we were required in school when announcing economic impact results. Now, members of Congress rely on the CBO score. A favorable or budget-neutral score makes a difference for a bill's success or failure. If there are savings, chances are better that the bill will get a vote on the floor. If it's budget neutral, it may still get a vote, but what happens if the analysis was wrong and it turns out to lead to big deficits? Or what if Congress failed to call up a bill for a vote because CBO scored it as deficit spending when really it could lead to substantial savings? The price of an inaccurate estimate right now is extremely high. Our national debt is closing in on $16 trillion. Major safety net programs like Medicare and Medicaid are heading for bankruptcy, and Congress has to act to bring our country back from the brink of a fiscal cliff. It is crucial for policymakers to have all available information about the true cost of legislation, and that's why I introduced H.R. 6136, the CBO Transparency Act, so lawmakers and the public have an opportunity to review CBO's work. Today you can access hospital visits, information, crop yields, and air quality levels, which are used to produce major regulations by the EPA and others. But you can't find out how the CBO scored things. Like any scientific study, opening up the details of CBO analysis for greater inspection and peer review will enable us to better understand how decisions are made. Now, this bill isn't about pointing out inaccuracies in CBO's estimates. What we're doing here is using transparency to enhance the credibility of the Congressional Budget Office. Once the information is out there, it can be reviewed by Congress and all Americans. Is the information correct? Did they consider all the facts? Was something left out? Was their analysis done right? In 2009, a University of Chicago researcher revealed CBO office had grossly underestimated potential savings from changes enacted by Congress to Medicare and Medicaid. For instance, CBO overestimated the cost of Medicare Part D by 40%. In the 1980s, CBO predicted spending on hospital stays under new law would be $19 billion more expensive than the actual costs. Congress changed Medicare to pay hospitals a fixed amount per admission, and this encouraged shorter stays, led to fewer diagnostic services, and lower administrative costs. But CBO didn't predict that, and by 1986, actual spending for hospital payments was 18% lower than estimated. The CBO also estimated that hospitals reporting infection rates would cost about $30 million over 5 years. Turns out when they report infection rates, they pay attention to it, and the savings has been billions of dollars over 5 years and tens of thousands of lives. When the CBO says a stimulus saved 3.3 million jobs, or tax rates don't impact decisions by individuals or businesses, or that cutting spending will slow economic growth, we currently have no way of understanding the conclusions. CBO has reached out, but we can't get information on how they got there. So ultimately, the decisions we make in Congress are only as good as the data upon which they are based. I hope all my colleagues will join me in this effort. Transparency is a cornerstone of sound government, and I urge Democrats and Republicans to sign on to this bipartisan good government bill, H.R. 6136, the CBO Transparency Act. And I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Spear, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise again today to talk about military sexual trauma. It's a cancer It's ubiquitous, it's unabated, and regretfully unaddressed. There was Tailhook in 1991. There was Aberdeen in 1996. There were scandals at the military academies. There were hearings, there were reports, there were toothless recommendations. So here we are again with yet another scandal. At this very moment, military training instructor Louise Walker stands before a court-martial for raping and assaulting recruits at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. Walker's job is to train freshly minted new Air Force recruits, many of them still in their teens. In all, there are 28 charges against him and 10 victims. Walker is a sexual predator. On Tuesday, a victim testified that right after graduating from boot camp, Walker approached her while she sat outside on a bench waiting for a bus that would take her to technical training school. Walker came up and ordered her to get some bleach from a supply room, and then he followed her. Once inside, he closed the door and took off his training instructor hat. "I'm not here for bleach, am I?" she said. While Walker had intercourse with her on a couch, she wondered, "My God, I hope he has a condom on." On Wednesday, another victim testified that while on laundry detail one day, Walker showed up and told her to follow him to get some towels, but to wait 5 minutes so the surveillance cameras would not capture them going up together. Once inside a dorm, he pulled her into a flight office, kissed her, and told her to perform oral sex on him. She said she did what she was told. Walker's defense attorneys argued that because the women never forcefully resisted, the sex was consensual. The defense also argues that because the women never came forward to report the incidents, they must not have felt victimized. If this happens in any high school in this country, if the prize English teacher, band instructor, or football coach had sex with his student, we would be outraged and we would demand action. That teacher would be fired. Yet at Lackland, where some of the recruits are just 18 or 19 years old, we rationalize the behavior of the perpetrator and we blame the victim. Apparently, we have a different definition of zero tolerance for sex offenders in the military world than we do for them in the civilian world. What does zero tolerance mean in the military? Is that just a catchphrase? The 35,000 Air Force recruits who funnel through Lackland each year are mostly confined to the base for 6.5 weeks of training. They get one 3-minute phone call once a week. Recruits live and breathe basic training and follow each and every order of their instructor. One rape victim at Lackland said, "Nothing a military training instructor says ends with a question mark." Walker is not the only predator charged at Lackland. 7 additional training instructors have been charged with sexual misconduct with trainees. At least another 5 are under investigation. One instructor, Staff Sergeant Craig LeBlanc, bragged that his conquests to his colleagues who waited a month before they reported the incident. Out of loyalty, the colleague stayed quiet. Once he finally reported LeBlanc's misconduct with recruits, that instructor was ostracized by fellow training instructors for being a tattletale. Is this really a culture of zero tolerance? Congress needs to investigate and to hold an independent hearing on the widespread sexual abuse at Lackland Air Force Base. In the last 3 years, since Louise Walker started working at Lackland, roughly 21,000 female airmen have cycled through the base. Have they been interviewed by investigators to determine if they too have been raped and sexually assaulted at Lackland? How widespread is this epidemic? At Lackland, out of the 31 identified victims, only 1 has reported the crime. Why are victims scared to come forward? Internal investigations will not get to the bottom of this. Congress needs to act. I called for a hearing in June and received no response. Last week, I was joined by a bipartisan group of 77 members of Congress calling for a hearing. We've received no response. I'm sick of waiting for action. The 19,000 members of our military who are raped each and every year deserve better than catchphrases. They deserve justice. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's a new small business in my district in southeast Texas, Cool Blast Lemonade Stand, run by the Sutton Sisters of Cypress, Texas. Clara is 7. Eliza is 4. Their newest employee is little brother Iric, who recently was hired to join the team. They even have their own Facebook page with 867 followers. On their Facebook page, they say this about their business: "We are entrepreneurs who start a lemonade stand for Lemonade Day. We are going to continue to work to earn money to spend it on things we would like, save, and also share with our 2 chosen charities, Meals on Wheels and Paws for Texas Rescue." Mr. Speaker, they learned all of these lessons without any interference from the federal government. Their father, Andrew, said this: "They did it all on their own. Nobody helped them except us. My wife and I both run our own businesses, so running a lemonade stand with them was showing them what they could do. They were curious how we got money for things." Mr. Speaker, the girls stood out in 100-degree Texas humid heat serving customers instead of being like many other kids going to the local swimming pool. Each day they opened for business, the girls learned valuable lessons. Lessons about budgets, lessons about capitalism, and lessons about life. Clara says, quote, "You learn how to make change. We learned about customer service, that we should always be nice to customers. We learned how to advertise. And we donate some of the money to charity to help other people out. We might buy a gift for our brother since he's our new employee." After one Lemonade Day in Houston, the girls said that they made enough money to pay their investors back in full. Mr. Speaker, when was the last time you heard of a 7-year-old using those business terms? These kids are getting on-the-job business training that no government, especially the federal government, gave them. They are practicing Americanism. In the America I know, we teach our kids the value of work and to work hard and entrepreneurship. We teach our kids from a young age that success does not come without sacrifice. Perseverance and responsibility pays off. These are the lessons that our children need to learn, not the lessons of trying to depend on government. You see, these kids made it without government doing anything except getting out of their way. So, Mr. Speaker, the next time you see the President, tell him successful businesses in America come from business owners, even kids, and not the federal government. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from New York, Mrs. Maloney, for 5 minutes.
I thank the Speaker for my recognition.